If you're wanting to learn how to apply some gel coat over freshly sanded and repaired fiberglass holes in your transom or anything else, this is the right episode for you. Now, in last week's episode, we were working on this cool little East Cape skiff that had some transom holes that are no longer needed. We're just going on to a clamp-on style, and we used a vinyl ester putty, a structural putty, to fill that. Now, we're actually going to use a little bit more of this today because after we got our initial holes filled, there's a number of kind of little corners and cracks here and maybe a little surfacing that we need to do. Now, prior to applying this, we've actually been spending the better part of the afternoon using tools such as this little Makita, that's the 9032, that narrow belt sander, and this cool little angle grinder. Matter of fact, I got all this is going to be on our Amazon store, the tools we use. Now, you don't have to have as many tools as the pros have, like in our boat shop. Sometimes just a block. Now, this is actually some structural foam and some 80 grit paper can work quite well for getting in there and sanding and surfacing and working around those corners and edges. This is looking pretty good, or this is pretty darn close to what you would want before you're getting ready to apply some more filler or gel coat. Now, one thing I personally like to do or typically recommend is using some kind of a cleaner or solvent. I use a lot of acetone. Important to remember that acetone is highly flammable. It's not good to breathe it. We do have good airflow through the shop, but I do typically like to apply a little bit on the surfaces just prior to adding more filler. Now, it's one of those things, you don't absolutely have to do that if you've sanded the surface well and cleaned it, but a lot of times it'll help get some of the dust and potential residue. I also recommend wearing some gloves, and if I weren't making a video right now, and for audio quality, a good respirator is not a bad idea at all. But basically, just remember, for you DIYers at home, you just want a good clean surface that's been thoroughly sanded with something along the lines of 80 grit if you're not worried about super fine cosmetics. Now, gel coat is pretty good at absorbing scratches. If you're trying to do something a little finer, like with paint, you'd probably want to go 120 or 220 grit. Now, a little bit of compressed air. Let's just move some of those acetone fumes along. And then I like to use a little Wagner heat source. You can readily pick those up. And again, we've got everything we're using here on our videos on our Amazon store, and that does help support the channel. I'd like to welcome everybody to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Joe Buskins. This is our family's boat shop. I'm a second-generation professional boat builder, a 100-ton licensed captain. We build and repair boats, and in the summer months, we actually run our 29-footer that we built here in our family's shop in our charter business. So, a little bit of warmth here. We don't want to go crazy, but we just kind of want to flash off any moisture, humidity, make sure the surface is nice and warm. And we did do, again, a little bit of sanding over our repairs, but you can see the silhouette of where our motorboat holes were previously. And there were a couple little gouges here that we're going to use some of our structural putty to fill, but pretty common stuff for the average boat owner, certainly doable for the average DIYer. So I like that pretty good. Now, another little tool that might be handy to have in your boat shop or your kit is a digital thermometer, 29 degrees Celsius or 85 degrees after we've warmed it up a little bit. Now, it's actually in the mid 70s or so right now. And the resins and putties we use are very sensitive to temperature. So the colder it is, the more catalyst or hardener you need to add. So if you come over here with me to our work table, we've got a big gallon container of the vinyl ester structural putty that's from Fiberglass Warehouse. It's based on the same format of the vinyl ester resin that we use all the time here on the channel. Huge fan of it. Used all kind of resins all over my life, and vinyl ester is by far the most universal in my opinion. It's got a very broad range and is completely compatible with gel coat, which is what we're going to be using. An ounce, just give or take, an ounce is going to be about the size of a golf ball. So I would say that is pretty darn pretty darn close, and we may go ahead and mix up, say, close to 2 ounces. One thing I like about vinyl ester versus epoxy, not only is it very strong and very good at waterproofing, but there's a little more flexibility in the range of your catalyst. So you would be adding catalyst in a percentage, and as a rule of thumb, for 1 ounce of it, generally we go a little bit hotter with the vinyl ester. So 1 ounce would need, say, 15 or 20 drops. Make a little divot in your putty, and they're going to send you some MEKP, or methyl ethyl ketone peroxide. That should be pretty good. Now remember, that stuff is highly corrosive. You do not want it on your skin, in your eyes. Eye protection's a good idea. Skin protection on your hands. We're going to swirl that around the blade, kind of chop it in there. You want a good thorough mix. I would say at least a minute of mix time. Or used to joke around with people, tell people mix it till you know it's mixed, and then mix it just a little more. This stuff has a perfect consistency. It's exactly like what we would mix here in the boat shop if we were making a thickened vinyl ester filler for structural repair. Certainly workable for below the water line. If you've got, say, osmotic blisters on your boat that stays in the water all the time, this would be a perfect putty for that. Very competitively priced too. If anybody's been looking around, be sure to reach out to Fiberglass Warehouse. They've got a very decent Fish Bump TV discount code. Save you some money on all your resins, putties, fillers, fiberglass supplies, everything you might need. Use a Ziploc bag, put the corner of it down in the bottom of a little disposable cup, and just shoot your mixed putty down in there. And that's going to make it a lot easier to dispense it in like a real precise application. So I generally like to twist the bag above it. That kind of keeps it from working its way backwards. And then just take the end off of that little bag. And that is going to be perfect for doing a fillet. Now, fillets, it looks like fillet. Sometimes people laugh at me and think I'm pronouncing it wrong, but if you're going to clean a fish, that's a fillet. If you're putting in a radius or a bead or a corner in something structural like a boat, that is going to be called a fillet. And that is what we're doing right now. So I'm going to start right over here, and you can see with this little piping bag trick, you can just very neatly apply a little bit. I'll try to make it, maybe we'll switch places. Here, I'm going to draw from left to right. It's a little bit easier for me. I just want to bolster or reinforce that little corner a little bit. Make this thing better than it was before. A little bit more, and then it was really kind of wonky over here in this far corner. There we go. I like it. Now, there's a number of tools you can use. Matter of fact, you can use something as simple as your gloved hand. They make some cool little tools that look like a ball bearing on the end of a steel rod. Or you can even use an old socket and you can clean it. But I have found one of the easiest ones, this is just an inexpensive silicone spatula from our local grocery store. And they work surprisingly nice for tooling these putties. Just going to take my time. Sometimes you have to back up a little bit and hit it once again. There was a little thin spot right there, so it's pretty easy for me to reapply some and then come back up a little bit. Get a nice, constant, smooth radius or radii all the way around. That looks a lot better than what we had. Now again, with a gloved hand, it's okay to kind of come in there and do a little touch up on those transitions if you need to. And that looks a lot better to me. I hope the camera picks that up, but that is definitely better than what we were looking at before. Now I got a little bit of putty left, you could certainly use your spatula, or I like these little flexible spreader blades or mixing blades. They come in little kits. Maybe my cameraman can catch that over there. You can buy them in assorted sizes. You can actually take a razor knife or scissors and cut them to width. That one I kind of semi-customized down to a specific size that I needed. And I want a little more fill here on the back side where we did our repairs here. I need a little more material there just to make that cosmetically look a little better. I like that pretty good. Just want a nice, consistent pass. I believe I touched, now this might be a good experience here, or show and experience. I touched my fillet right there when I was tooling that. It's okay. You can certainly come back. Touch that up a little bit. Problem solved. There was a little thin spot or kind of a low spot right there. Same for right in here. Whatever they did when they were building this boat, it was kind of different than what we typically see. And that's the thing with boat repair. There are so many variables when you're doing this stuff. Different boat companies. There's literally hundreds of boat companies in the US. And this is a very lightweight specialty craft. And the way they did things is kind of unique, but it's a cool little boat. I like it. It's kind of growing on me. I've gotten used to bigger boats here lately, and you look at something like this initially, you're like, man, what in the world would you do with a little boat like this? But I kind of see the light. I'm getting it. Now, we had a couple dinks right in there. This would be a prime example of where we could use a little bit of this structural putty. If it's something maybe a little deeper or a little thicker than what you would want to use, just thicken Gelcoat for. And then sometimes you can use your hands to feel if there's any low spots. That's actually feeling pretty good, but there's a couple little divots right over here on the side. I'm just gonna hit that with a touch. Same thing on this side, using my hands to kind of feel for low places where we might need to add some material. This one down here feels a little bit low. Just gonna give that a little dab. You don't want to go crazy with it. This stuff works so nice. Just a light touch is all you need. Now, there's a lot of people that think that resin or putties will not cure without wax, or you got to put some gel coat on them, over them, and that does help them to dry tack free, but that doesn't mean you can't skim surfaces with a putty like this and make it work. If you are concerned about that curing tack free and you want to do something about it, you could certainly use a little bit of peel ply. I pre-cut these. You could lay them right over where you applied the putty. Use your putty blade just to kind of draw it out, lay it down. Want to minimize wrinkles if possible. You can also use a brush to do that. You do want to leave a corner kind of up and exposed so that you can come back the next day after it's cured and have a starting point. If you don't leave yourself a starting point, it's going to be kind of tricky. And this will act as an air inhibitor and allow our fillet to dry tack free. And a lot of times it'll give you a little bit smoother finish. Relatively inexpensive. Fiberglass Warehouse can help you with your peel ply as well. That is where we sourced this particular batch. Now you can see that our table is already set up with all the equipment and materials and supplies. That is a big part of doing this kind of work. We try to make it look easy and flow. And growing up in a boat shop, we've got thousands of hours of experience doing this, and I'm happy to share with everybody. But a lot of it comes down to good quality prep work and having all your materials laid out, and then mentally kind of just walking through the process before you even start. What am I gonna need? How much am I gonna need? Where am I gonna start? Where am I gonna finish? What tools do I need? And that's gonna make a huge difference in how the job flows and moves along. So there we go. Again, a very light touch. It's almost like if you've ever done wallpaper or window tint, maybe. It could be similar. I would think guys that do drywall or auto body work would be naturals. Guys and gals, obviously. Mostly guys doing this kind of work, but there are some gals out there that are doing as well, and we want to welcome everybody to the channel. We're glad to help and share. So I think that looks pretty good. It is late in the day. We're gonna try to get more done tomorrow. That's another thing you can think about, you DIYers at home, is staging your work. Maybe trying to get a little putty on something that needs it in the evening so that in the morning when you start, you're fresh and ready to go. So we've let our material dry overnight, and our peel ply should be ready to remove. And that looks awesome. Beautiful. That's kind of one of those little tricks of the trade. Never used it before. Highly recommend picking up some. This comes from Fiberglass Warehouse, and as I mentioned before, they have got an excellent discount code for Fish Bump TV viewers. So be sure to take advantage of that, save you some money. And here we go, a little more. Look how nice. Theoretically, you could go right over that. Now, every now and again, when you remove it, you'll get some of these little fibers. Super easy to remove. Peel this away at a sharp angle. Going to be very little body work or sanding or surfacing required. Now, when we were applying the material yesterday, though, if you remember, we did the fillets in there, same material, same batch, and that is cured. It is hard. It may be a little tackier, but it will still cure. It'll just remain somewhat tacky on the surface. Let's get to doing a little bit of sanding here. Good idea to wear some PPE anytime you're gonna be making some dust. Also a big fan of having some fans, actual fans in the background, drawing that dust away. And a big shop vac can draw a lot of this material. Sometimes we will use these discs that are slightly used, and for getting in these little corners where our fillets are, not a bad idea to use a little bit of the old sandpaper just to knock any little burrs or edges down. As you can see, you can still sand resin that doesn't have a wax additive in it, but it will gum up your paper a little more readily than if it hasn't had a wax or if it hasn't been covered with some peel ply. Sometimes with taping, if you're new to this, we may tape an area and then sand and work around it, and it may require a second phase of taping. You can see here that kept us pretty good, but we do have a little bit right down on that edge there, and I'm gonna have to come back and kind of work that in detail, sand that a little bit. Now, one thing you can do sometimes, little corners like that, is you can actually use a razor blade. Now this one, really would prefer a brand new one. I may get one there in a moment, but sometimes you can just use that little razor blade to scrape very precisely without getting very far away from the edge. And if you just got a little bit of residue there, you can scrape it away. Sometimes you can kind of come from underneath just like that. So we have moved ahead with taping and masking off the areas we're working around, but I did want to show you folks a couple tricks. First off, you know, the standard good blue, that is the Scotch easy release masking tape, very popular in the painting industry. But I also want to show you a couple of things to get a good masking job where it looks correct. sometimes you can use something as simple as like a big framing square to make sure that you're getting parallel lines. We're just going to use the top of the transom here. You can see where we've marked off there, and we got the tape running at a nice similar angle. And then we took a tape measure and measured down again from the top and made sure that we got the same dimensions across the bottom. And then sometimes it's a nice idea to step back and just from a distance look at it and be sure visually it looks correct. Sometimes you can make adjustments because we are taping off a new dimension here, slightly outside of and different from what it was originally. Another trick that I wanted to show is sometimes when you're taping or masking and you want to rough the surface a little bit, but sandpaper may scratch or damage the tape line, you can use something like the red Scotch-Brite, and a lot of times we will hold it and it will put on enough of a surface or scratch there on the surface. As long as it's been cleaned and de-waxed, that will be perfectly fine, and it won't damage your tape as long as you don't get too terribly aggressive. We went ahead and mixed up some light gray gel coat. We tried to get close to this. Perfection with gel coat matching can be tricky, but it's going to look a lot better than just the black that was on there. And we may be using some clear air dry coatings and additive to it to make it flow out better, and we may be adding some surface seal on the last coat, but I believe it's going to take 2, maybe even 3 coats to get good coverage. And when you working with something like this, sometimes spraying is an option, but when you spray, you got to be concerned about overspray, and it can be some prep. Rollers are real popular on this channel. We use them a lot, but in this particular application, be really tricky to get a roller in all these little intricate corners. So I've decided that a good quality paintbrush, this is a Purdy, a P-U-R-D-Y. They make a good brush, but there's other good ones out there. And you'd be surprised at how nice of a finish you can get with a quality paintbrush. So we're going to go that route. Now I think we're going to go with about 3 ounces, which is close to 100 milliliters for our friends on the metric system there. Sometimes I'll adjust that as I'm pouring it. I may decide actually, I think 2 ounces might be just fine for this first coat. I want to be able to get in there and also seal up any little pinholes that might be on the surface. Yep, that's actually about 2.5 ounces. So that would be about 75 milliliters or so. So we're going to go pretty sporty. I'm going to go with about 40 drops of the MEKP, methyl ethyl ketone peroxide. Let's see here. That should be pretty close. Maybe one more little jab just for good measure. It's fairly cool today. A lot of the times temperatures are going to affect how much catalyst we're going to run. 25 degrees Celsius or 78 degrees, which is fairly, I say fairly cool. We're just kind of approaching the fall season, so anything in the 70s feels pretty amazing compared to what we've been dealing with all summer long. Now, I actually want this first coat to be relatively thick and have good coverage. If you're trying to thin your gel coat and get it to flow, you can add some of the air dry super clear from Orca, and we'll be sure to put a link for all this stuff. Again, Fiberglass Warehouse has a lot of these supplies, and then our Amazon store is going to have a lot of the stuff, if not all of the stuff we use here on the channel. And then as a generic thinner, sometimes just a styrene monomer is used. Matter of fact, I could even add a little splash. I've poured out some of the clear additive there, and sometimes that just kind of helps it flow a little better. Just a little splash. Now, that's not enough to keep it from being a problem for the second coats to bond or adhere. It's not going to make it too slick. You can mix the clear up to 50-50 with your gel coat, and if you were to do that, that would only be on the last coat though, because it will make it dry slick and hard. And if you wanted to follow up coats, you'd have to let it cure and then scuff the surface lightly. Generally about a minute of mix time is what I typically recommend. Want to be sure, especially down in the corners and on the edges, to get good agitation. This is a great time of the year to be doing this kind of work. Sometimes people don't think of it, but for our region, especially the fall, fantastic temperatures. Temperatures in the 70s to about the high 50s would be considered optimal, with high 60s and 70s being ideal. Very comfortable for us to work, and the materials will cure and dry no problem. All right, here we go, folks. I always like to be sure my brush is clear of any loose hairs. That is the brush that we use. That's the particular one. We're not going to go crazy heavy initially. We're just going to start from the top. I'm trying to get a nice feel. This is one area where a brush can really work. I knew we had a good bit of raw exposed fiberglass here, and a lot of times a brush is hard to beat for filling pinholes and imperfections. A roller can work great for larger areas, but it would be very challenging to get a roller in all these little intricate corners and shapes. Very good. Starting from the top, that way if we get a drip or a run, kind of starting from the top and working our way down. Don't expect your first coat to be perfection either. Sometimes it takes 2, sometimes even 3 coats at a minimum to get good coverage. I'm trying not to run over my tape a whole lot. That's one thing you got to be careful with. Sometimes you have to pull tape between layers because gel coat is quite thick and quite tough, and it can be hard to remove the gel coat. I have found a lot of times we will paint or gel coat right up to the edge lightly, and then on the last coat we may go over the edge just a bit and then remove the gel coat, or the tape rather, before the gel coat has a chance to fully cure. Otherwise it can be a bit of a bear to remove. Not impossible, but see that pinhole that was down there, how the brush does such a nice job of closing that up. Let's see here, I'll get a better angle so the camera can see what we're doing. Very enjoyable to do this kind of work. Save yourself some money as well. A lot of people I'm talking to just can't find anybody in their part of the country that does this kind of work, but sometimes it's hard to justify spending what it may cost. If you were to get an estimate for a little repair like this, it can be relatively expensive because it's time consuming. Not that it's rocket science, but a little bit on this edge over here. Just nice, easy passes. Quality brush does make all the difference. Just want to be sure to clean it well afterward, because gel coat is a lot tougher than your typical water-based paints or home-based products. Looking pretty nice. I like it. I like it, I like it. You can see what I mean about these little intricate shapes. Even with a brush, it's a little tricky to get in there, and you can imagine with a roller, it would be really challenging. You can see the gel coat's got a nice little gloss and shine to it. Of course, when we do a second coat with some wax in it, that will flatten out a bit, kind of match the rest of the boat. Sometimes you can, if you need to come back over and it'll want to drag a little bit or pull, and sometimes you can put a little fresh gel coat on the, there's a loose hair starting to show. We want to get rid of those before they stick. All right, here we go. Hopefully this, we mix this pretty hot. I'm trying to move pretty fast, but it can be surprisingly fast to cure. The conditions are nice, and the conditions are very nice today. So I'm going to try to rush through and get the outer part. Masking is important to keep your work looking nice and clean. Again, this first coat, we don't have to get it perfect, but if we can get the majority of the pinholes and some decent coverage, I'd be pretty happy with that. All right, I feel like we're in the home stretch. Like I said, gel coat is much thicker than your typical house paint, so that would be the main thing to kind of just be aware of. Good thing about it being thick though is it's usually got pretty good coverage, and it'll fill in imperfections. That's looking pretty good. Now obviously you could spend more time and shoot for perfection, but the little boat's already got some age on it, and this is going to be a fishing boat and utility skiff, so perfection isn't really necessary. And that's one of those things that'll make people crazy sometimes, is trying to get perfection on these kind of jobs. So I think that looks quite nice. We're gonna clean up our brush. Typically that would be a matter for me of going to our trash can. A lot of times we will try to wipe it out of the brush if we can, and then to try to minimize the use of solvents, we'll try to squeeze it out into a blue shop towel, and then straight into our handy dandy acetone bucket that we always keep here at the ready. And you can see just how quickly that's going to get the vast majority of it. Sometimes I will come back with a clean little bucket of acetone, or you can use your spray bottle. Start from the top, work your way down, wring it out. So it's been about 30 to 45 minutes, and our gel coat has gone through most of the curing cycle in what I call tacked off, meaning I can touch the edge of it and it's not coming off on my finger or my glove, but it's still in the process of curing fully. And so now it's kind of an optimal time to get ready for our second coat. And what we're gonna do with this, we're doing 1 ounce. I'm gonna go this time about 1 ounce of gel coat, and I am gonna add some surface seal. Now this is same as like modifier C or wax solution, or some people would call it similar to like a sanding aid. And generally we can go up to about 5% on this. It's a clear, it's dissolved in styrene, and I find going pretty aggressive with it is quite all right. It seems to work just fine. That's probably on the heavy side of 5%. So if you go a little heavy, say on your additive, and you think you could use a little more gel coat, it's okay to add a little back. There is actually a pretty good bit of wiggle room dealing with this stuff though. Now sometimes it can seem a little challenging to get it to want to mix in with your gel coat, and sometimes one of the other little tricks that I have learned over the years, especially if the weather is a little cooler, and again you want to be careful with sparks and heat, but sometimes warming the material up a little bit, especially with the wax additive, will help the wax dissolve. Be very careful. Again, open flames, high heat, these chemicals are all flammable. lots of experience here, so don't do this unless you feel absolutely comfortable. But that did help. If you look in there, you can actually see by just warming the surface and continuing to mix, we did get it to fully blend. We're gonna go ahead and add nearly an ounce of clear additive back into it to help it flow out a little nicer on the second coat. So you can do either or. You can use that as a surface seal, and if you go 50-50, you can use the air dry clear coatings as a surface seal, and you can even use them together. In this application, I'm using them because the clear additive does help the gel coat flow out nicer, but I actually want a bit of a flat finish on the surface. And the clear additive is going to give you a glossier finish. The wax additive is going to give you a flatter finish. So the rest of this little boat has a flatter tone to it. So I'm going to be going more that direction. This is one of those things we've learned through years and years in the boat shop. There's no substitute for just trying your hand at these materials and working with them. I know it can be, sometimes folks can be intimidated by it, but I've said it before on the channel, you don't want to be stricken with analysis paralysis. Sometimes people just analyze stuff to death and they never move forward with their project. And you know, if you're wanting to get into fiberglass and composites, sometimes maybe starting with a little small repair job, or even just getting some materials and playing around with it a little bit, just experimenting, or get something that's non-critical, not difficult to work on, or not that important, and going from there. So we've got about 2.5 ounces or so, and that last batch really went off pretty aggressively. So again, we're using our little cheat sheet there. It might help as a reference. 1 ounce, 10 to 20 drops, and then say if we had 4 ounces, 1.25 to 2.5. That would be cc's. And a lot of times when we're mixing larger amounts, we'll use this dispenser with the graduated dispensing cup there so that we can see. And again, if you haven't seen it in some of our other videos, we got a world of videos that can help you out with that. So I'm gonna go a little bit lighter on catalyst than we did, I think, than the last batch, because it cured pretty quickly. It looks like we are sitting at about 2.5 ounces. So I'm gonna go about 30 drops or so. Again, a very thorough mix, especially when you're mixing a little cup like this. Absolutely get in all the corners, edges, sides. This is the little detail stuff that gets people sometimes, as they try to rush and hurry. They're afraid it's going to cure on them. But an undermixed material is worse, in my opinion, than one not curing. I'm going to start in a similar pattern. So we started right on the top on the front side. So same deal. Start from the top, work our way down. I'm gonna do this very systematically because we are doing gray on gray, and the first coat does not have wax in it. So it's gonna remain somewhat tacky if it's not properly sealed. So what I find is by putting the gel coat on in the same way, or the same method that I did the first coat, and then do it very methodically, top to bottom, left to right. Want to be sure we get good accurate coverage. There's another loose hair. We do not want that in our mix. Right down to the edge and up the sides we go. Same over here. Work my way around. Want to be sure we get some this time all the way out to the edge of the tape. Gel coat can be put on quite thick, not like paint. Paint dries, gel coat cures. So it's a chemical reaction going on. So it is quite all right for gel coat to be applied thicker than what most people would think if you're used to dealing with conventional paints. Now is a great time to be working on your boats. The fall season, matter of fact, even the winter season, a lot of people don't realize it, but when we're doing maybe large projects like transoms, floors, stringers, there's a lot of demolition work and patterning and templating. And when the weather is cooler, that is great weather for doing demolition work. And then that way you are ready in the springtime. So I would say if you got a project that you want ready for next summer, now is the time to start. Even if you're not actively gel coating and fiberglassing, get a start on your demolition work, making patterns and templates, stockpiling materials. I know right now I'm talking to quite a few of our Patreons that are working on their projects, and they're moving right ahead even though we're coming into the winter season. Now's a good time to think of all of our Patreon subscribers, everybody that's following the channel. We appreciate you folks so much and your support of what we're doing. Everybody that's watching and following along, we couldn't do this without you. And now's a good time to ask, if you haven't already, totally free and takes 1 second to hit that little subscribe button right there off to the side of your screen. That tells the YouTube algorithm we're doing a good job. As the channel grows, we can do more of these videos to help you DIYers out there. So if you don't mind, go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're finding value in the content that we're producing for you folks at home. You can see where trying to roll this would be really, really tricky. Sometimes a good paintbrush is all you need. You just got to remember where you have been and where you're going, because we want our coverage to be uniform. We want our finish to look professional. Sometimes we would do 3 or 4 coats, even if you were trying to wet sand this out afterward and buff it to a sheen or a polish. It may take up to 5 coats in some cases, brushed on, and then the last coat you would put the wax additive. That is another question we get all the time. Sometimes there's confusion on when to add wax. On this little particular job, we're not going to be sanding it out, so 2 coats is covering plenty well. And there's wax in the last coat, never in the first coat. If you're going to do a second coat, you would not want the wax in there, because it would just be like, say for example, when you wax your car, the idea is it repels dirt and bugs and tar and that kind of stuff. And same with the gel coat, even though the main reason you put it in there is so you might get a tack-free surface, but that wax is going to inhibit even following layers of gel coat. And what I'm doing here, folks, I'm starting on the edge and I'm kind of lifting mid-stroke so that you don't have an abrupt line there. We're trying to brush in a nice side to side or up to down. Generally, whichever is the longer route or line is the direction that we will usually paint in. Sometimes you come back and you'll see maybe a little tiny pinhole, and you're just using just a tiny piece of the brush to help lay that out. I think overall that looks pretty good. Not a bad idea to have some extra eyes to help you look. Sometimes I will get at a low angle and use the light to look and see if I can see a spot that I missed or a variation in our application. But I think we are good. So I've given it about 10 minutes to kind of solvent flash a little bit. But I want to go ahead and pull this tape before it firms up. Now, one thing I've learned is it is very hard to pull masking tape with gloved hands. So a lot of times what I will do is leave one hand with a glove so that you can handle the tape and the other without. And what we're going to try to do is pull this away at a very sharp, acute angle. You can see I'm kind of almost pulling the tape back against itself very sharply and kind of methodically. I'm trying to demask in such a way that we're working our way around from where we started to where we want to finish. And you can see again, I'm pulling at a nice sharp angle. In a gloved hand, sometimes there is residual wet gel coat, but boy, it's hard to get that masking tape started with a rubber glove. A lot of the quality of your work has to do with how well you do masking. Masking is kind of a little skill unto itself. A little bit of practice. Again, you can experiment and practice. Masking tape is fairly cheap in the scheme of things, but it sure can make the difference in the quality of your work. Now, if you make the mistake of leaving that on there until the gel coat fully cures, it can be a real challenge. Gel coat is strong enough to actually tear or break the masking tape, and you may have to razor blade it off of there or some other method. See there again, we're going to pull it away at a very sharp angle. Even if it's kind of cured over the tape, by going at that sharp angle, it'll almost tear it, if you will. It'll tear the gel coat, because the gel coat is starting to firm, but it's not fully cured at this point. Same here, nice and sharp. And then we're trying not to get back into our wet gel coat. All right, that looks pretty good. Now there is a slight color and sheen variation on there, but what I find a lot of times, like with gel coat, is it will weather in. And this little boat has been painted. You can see there's white gel coat underneath, and then what we see, this gray here, is actually paint. And I really didn't want to go over the paint with the gel coat, because sometimes gel coat can etch into it and cause it to wrinkle and cause a bigger problem. So for all intents and purposes, now what you would probably do is, if in the future we decided to ever come back and paint this boat, repaint it, you could just scuff up the gel coat, and then you could come over the gel coat with paint and make everything match and make it look nice. But I think that looks pretty clean and neat compared to the 4 big gaping holes that we had. And if you didn't see that previous episode, we used some of our vinyl ester structural filler and some fiberglass, some CSM and vinyl ester resin to repair that. So hopefully y'all enjoyed that episode. If you did, again, please remember to give us a like, subscribe, comment, share, tell a friend. It's Captain Joe here, Island Marine Charters, Fish Bump TV. My son Logan working hard behind the scenes as my amazing cameraman, and we'll catch you folks in the next episode.